Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. If you're undecided about what to do with the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the board game, well, now you're in luck. We are nearing the end of the campaign. I have looked at everything. Gameplay, I've read through the rulebook, I've looked at all the updates. I mean, all that you can look up at this point. What do you need to know to help make the right decision for you? What is, in a nutshell, going on? What are some pros? What are some cons I've seen? A little bit of everything. Now, I haven't played it. I'm going through all of the information that I can, filtering it for you guys, so that you can have more information than based off of somebody else's preview. Let's talk. Let's do this. Let's go into it. The number one thing that people are saying across the board, the little dispersed quotes you see everywhere on the pages and the updates. This is like Skyrim, the video game. Well, it's a $350 version of it, but it's emulating it. That's because they are utilizing that open world system that makes Skyrim and its ilk on the video game side of things in the first place so appealing to so many. And they're trying to manipulate it into a board game so that it attracts the same ilk, especially those of us who are attracted to campaign games. One campaign game is too many, 1,000 is not enough, as they say. And that is true of this because not only are they making it open world, they're also giving you campaigns, 3 in the core set, and additional ones in expansions that are going to allow you to have some guidance, if you will, without just the go anywhere, do anything, aimlessness, directionless sort of approach that you may otherwise be a little scared of at the same time. Now, how do you do something this expansive, right? You have a 52-page rulebook is what you do. And that's what they have on the website. And I've read through this whole thing. I sat down over the holiday weekend and I read through the full thing to get the best glimpse of what all of the mechanisms are doing, because even sometimes just watching gameplay videos, you don't really get a sense of, well, they did this, but why did they do this? Or could they have done something else? Or why was it done this way exactly? And the rulebook gives you that. And I'm going to give Modipus a lot of credit here. This is a good rulebook. There is clearly some time, energy, and significant effort put out in this rulebook already, because I have read several other major campaign books recently, Harakiri, Pathfinder Arena, and this is by far the best rulebook of those. Without a doubt, no problem saying that whatsoever. So that is very, very well hammered out, and I think that goes to the sense of why people are saying, okay, this is a solid experience. This is a solid game. But what I'm also not hearing with a lot of those quotes is, would you buy this if you had to spend your own money? Right? That's sort of the thing missing in a lot of those quotes or those videos. This is a very ambitious game, though. Something like 15 different decks that you're going to be having to utilize. Not manage all, and they're not like super complicated, but there's a lot of cards. There are also a lot of dice rolling times that you're going to have to be able to deal with. I mean, there's essentially 3 different skills on the dice that you're going to have to know. And with the main skill dice that you're going to be rolling, it's got 3 sides for the easiest skill level. It's got 2 sides for the medium skill level, like, in terms of how hard it is to complete this. And then it's got 1 out of the 6 sides being the super hard one. And so you're going to have to be being able to mitigate that and sometimes deal with the fact that the dice just aren't going to roll your way. And so if you don't want heavy skill checks, even with mitigation, you might want to look heavily at this. And speaking of, in general, of this game, this is more of the campaign lifestyle-esque games because of the sheer plethora that they're offering you. As I mentioned, the 3 campaigns with multiple chapters or sessions within each campaign. Now you're seeing with the expansions, they're adding whole new campaigns, but also sort of modularity even with the core, where they say, okay, we've got this mini campaign where you're going to be having these hitmen or these assassins that are going to be coming up, and we recommend playing it in the first chapter of the campaign. We recommend playing it in the first campaign of the core game, or we recommend in the middle of the second campaign in the core game. So they're giving you a little bit of variability depending on what you want. But again, that's additional, and that's not cheap regardless. Because as much as this is not a miniature game, this is a miniature game. This doesn't need miniatures, but they've put them in there through all aspects. Now, I do like the fact, and we'll talk about the page here at the end here. We'll go into the page and what should you get, what shouldn't you get, that sort of stuff. We'll get to that. But they have separated out at least a little bit in the deluxeifications of the rampant miniatures everywhere, sort of like what Awakened Realms does with theirs, where there's some, but if you want to get a ton, here you go, the extra amount, but if you don't want, then you're not going to be, hampered essentially gameplay-wise if you don't. The other big thing is stuff costs a lot of money. Buying stuff, re-rolling, upgrading, enchanting, doing tests, all of this stuff costs a lot of money. There is a lot of buying. There's a lot of market in this game. There is a lot of that every single place you go in all of these strongholds, and all of these strongholds having different markets that you can go to and buy. Some will have this resource, some won't have this resource, some will have this equipment, some won't have this equipment, and so you're going to have to deal with that. And the strongholds themselves, if the wandering monsters attack them, you get downgraded, and if they start rioting, well, it can do sort of an outbreak in the pandemic sense, and then you're having sort of this echoing, reverberating effect throughout the land, because you have these, I don't remember the exact term, not corruption tokens, but basically the bad tokens, and you have these slots on your personal quests, on the world quests, on the strongholds, on a bunch of different things, and part of what you're doing is pandemicking it, where you say, okay, well, I can get 3 of these on the world quest before we fill the world quest. But you know what? I'm going to use my personal quest. I'm going to get personal quests, not because necessarily I want to get the personal quest, even though they're going to help me upgrade my character much faster and help me level up and deal with things in the main stuff more quickly and easily. But it also can soak up some of those negative things that we're going to be having happen, because you're just going to be pulling event card after event card after event card every single turn. And do you like that or not? I mean, it's stuff always going on, stuff always mitigating, stuff always being dealt with in a positive and negative way. But I mean, it's more pandemic-esque in those senses than you may think too. And again, is that an attractive feature or not? Because a lot of people are, pretty divided how they feel on one side or the other of pandemic, or the pandemic nature, especially when you're playing in this cooperative sense. Now let's talk about that cooperative sense for a minute, right? 1 to 8 players. The 1 person is a solo variant. You're basically not really two-handing it, but you get a character, you set them upside down, you rotate between who's the first player marker and the second player marker, and so if stuff happens on the non-player's turn, it doesn't really happen, and then you go back to your turn and you can kind of cooperate with them and kind of not, and so it's there. This is not a ideal solo game, though, I would say. This is not like an expansive, completely different, completely fully fleshed out solo version compared to multiplayer version. It's not, and that's okay. It's just not going to be probably, if you're looking for the ultimate solo version, well, go pick up Spirit Island or go pick up Mage Knight or go pick up Too Many Bones or something like that, right? What this is simultaneous play where you're moving around and doing stuff and then taking your allocated actions each round, and you can go around and do them. And ideally, when I see this, I worry that this is, although the first part is simultaneous, the second part is not. I mean, the moving around and the going, and it's easy. But some of the actions and whether or not you want to group together to go to a market, or you want to travel together to go somewhere, or whether or not you want to go in a dungeon together, or you want to battle over the roaming monster together, those are decisions that you're going to have to make. And I worry that, the 2-player count, it's fine. 3-player count, no problem. 4-player count, I can see that starting to be a little bit of more of a slog. And now, again, not a huge deal, but I could see it slowing down things, especially when you're having to mitigate all of these different, decks and quests and things that I've already mentioned, right? Side quests, main quests, world quests, personal quests, roaming monsters, not getting to the towns. I mean, there's a lot to do. And it is, again, it's more of a pandemic in that sense. Skyrim pandemic? Anyway. And I worry and even shudder at the sense that they're offering a 5 to 8-player expansion, because I just can't see myself wanting to ever play most games like that in a 5 to 8-player. Can you imagine playing 8-player pandemic? 8-player pandemic, right? Think about that for a minute. I mean, it'd be a long time before you got to your next turn. That'd be what I'd be most worried about in this game, even though some of it is simultaneous. I mean, that's just almost too much going on. Let me pull up the rulebook, because a couple of these next points I think deserve to be pointed out and give more of an illustration, because if you're like me, it's a see, not necessarily a hear, and I can tell you some of the things that I found interesting about the rulebook that I think of should be of note. I wasn't kidding about the size of this rulebook, right? I mean, there's a lot of little things going on there that you just need to be aware of. We're going to talk about combat here just for a second, because combat is done slightly differently, because you're going to be rolling dice for these monsters. Based on what you roll determines what attack or what AI thing they do, and if they don't have it, well, they miss, and if they do have it, they do whatever action it is. But it's going to be targeting several different areas of you, whether it's the armor, the health, or the actual like action sort of thing. And so it depends. I mean, you can see a couple of the different symbols here. Okay, you can get this type of damage, you can get this one or this one, you can get, you know, your health. So I mean, there's different variations on those trackers that are going to be, you know, negotiated. And if you run out of one, then it starts affecting just the base health. And you can see against, you know, I can see all of the different types up here: magical attacks, light attacks, heavy attacks, magic armor, heavy armor, light armor, all doing different types of reductions. The other thing is if you die, and we'll get down to this in a second. Here we'll talk about an example of what the monsters look like here, for example. So if you roll one of the lightning bolts, it does this thing. If you roll the skull, it does this thing. And it again specifies the type of damage, and it specifies that if you don't have that type of resistance, it's just going to do damage to your health. And so again, if you roll either one of these, then he does just 4 of this armor. If the vampire drains, heals for 2, and then also has a sneak, and it's got some of the statistics over here in terms of how strong it is. And again, it's relatively straightforward. Again, kind of cool. Now, the one thing I worry about, though, is that there is not necessarily kill stealing, but there is sort of kill stealing. If you look at the bottom here, this is the experience in the lower left-hand corner of everybody that fought that creature that they get. But then when you're fighting in a group, you pick rewards, depending on, you know, where the creature is, if it's a roaming monster versus if in the dungeon. So I mean, there's slight nuances there, but I think in dungeons, like the first person gets like to choose whatever they want, and then the rest of the people just get to like choose whatever's left. So if you're kind of cooperative, that doesn't always necessarily sit as well. But again, you can like trade and, you know, trade resources and items and things like that. So it's not a huge deal by any means either. So then they also talk about this ace in the hole, as they call it, the final blow. And if you receive any damage that would, reduce their health to their final blow or lower, it stops at the final blow token. If you have more of these final blow tokens than like just one, so it gets stopped each and every time. So it sort of prevents you from dying, just like all of a sudden, boom, you're dead and there's nothing you can do about it, right? It stops it and allows you to potentially retreat or get away from the encounter or, you know, do anything like that. So if we go down here, this is also the other thing that you need to know. So, I mean, you can see an example of one of the dice here, one of the dice, and you can see that, okay, well, what you do is you go left to right. So if you're fighting both of these creatures at the same time, you can only deal damage to this one. So even if this one is the one that's really causing you a lot of trouble, this one is the one that you can only attack until you get to this one. And it happens no matter how big of a group you're in. And so what's going to happen is you roll the die, you get the axe. Well, you go through this Bander Berserker and, oh, no axe. Oh, wait, nope. Then you go over to the next guy, the Restless Draugr. The Restless Draugr has the axe and then he does 4 damage, but you can't actually stop him from doing that because you can only attack the Bandit Berserker right now. And so how are you going to like that element of things too, where you can't choose and the AI is just the die roll? And again, it's not as mitigated, but it depends on how you feel about that. I actually don't mind that mechanic. I loved that mechanic similarly in some senses with the recent Vagrant song. The other interesting thing is they have sort of a pre-constructed what you're going to find in certain dungeons. And it depends on what campaign you're in. It depends on what chapter you're in. So they give you 2 prime examples right here. We have campaign 2, chapter 3, and campaign 1, chapter 1. And it says, again, you're fighting one of these and then one of these. And they give you sort of what you're going to be fighting and all the different types of monsters. There's something like 8 different monsters. Again, that goes to like all those different decks that I mentioned at the beginning. And then again, you're going to be fighting different stuff and more stuff. And so you can see that the boxes now here are slightly bigger and the boxes have monsters together. So this is going to be you fighting one monster as an encounter. And then to complete the dungeon, you have to fight 2 monsters at the same time where it starts to get harder, which again, sort of brings up the beginning is they make a very good point here at the end that you may not be strong enough to fight a lot of this stuff on your own, and you're going to have to recruit other people, otherwise you're just going to fail. And it also goes right into those personal quests that I mentioned, and you're going to have to go sideways and not always be able to go straight forward in this game. One, because you might not want to, and one, you want to explore as much as you can, because that's kind of Skyrim in general, right? But it's also going to allow you to progress a little bit faster that way, but it's also going to be a timing thing if you're looking at the world quest side of things as well. The other concern I have, and they even mention it down here a little bit further in the rule book, and I'm not going to be able to find it off the top of my head, but one of my biggest concerns was they mention that there could very well be variable player progression. Meaning, you could be at this level, I could be at this level, and, you know, then they say basically like you do on the MMORPGs, like you go with the stronger person and you go with them so that you can catch up quicker and get more experience by beating harder stuff. Which, again, how do you feel about that? Is that something you'd be okay with? Like, someone else is a level 4, you're a level 2. You're fighting super hard things. Are you going to be strong enough to be able to be helping out with those super strong things? Or are you just kind of riding their coattails until you get stronger? And if you're a person that likes to do it on their own, or likes to be feeling like they're contributing significantly, is that going to be a pet peeve? Or if you're okay with just doing that and getting caught up to things so that you can contribute later on, again, something to be aware of. So here we go. Here is the part where I was talking about when you complete the dungeon. Whoever dealt the killing blow, the last blow in the dungeon, doesn't matter what else you did, they get the treasure card. On top of the rewards card that they would normally get from the card, they also get a treasure card determined by the level of the most powerful enemy in the dungeon. And so, you know, they go this one or they go this one. And so just, you know, again, and then once you get whatever it is, you get to choose, you know, from the bottom that I mentioned earlier. Okay, great. Improving your character, leveling up, legendary skills. Again, this is something that sounds really good, but I've been looking at some of these skills at the bottom and they seem less than impressive on my side of things. Again, not having firsthand experience, but this is also something where, I mean, you're going to have to be saving and saving and saving, because you essentially have to get your 9th skill, because you can learn up to 8 separate skills before you can even consider getting one of them as a legendary skill. And the problem and the blessing and curse with that is that they also activate enemy abilities that are only activated if somebody in the group has a legendary skill. Which, again, legendary skills sound really good, but I was less than impressed with some of these. Because, I mean, smithing, regular. When performing, roll an additional die. And as a side note, when every single skill gives you roll an additional die, I mean, I don't think you need to write it on every single one, right? Like, that's the one-handed. When performing, get additional die. The legendary, when performing, roll 2 additional dice. Okay. Okay. When upgrading equipment, you know, blank on the first additional card draw, you know, get an additional one. Roll 2 additional dice when upgrading and pay 1 fewer. So, again, it's hard to say how good some of these are without hands-on experience. But and that's me, my one concern. Again, you know, the archery one and the weapons ones are all like, just roll 1 additional dice. Well, the other ones, you know, are the crafting are gain, you know, an extra armor and gain an extra armor with the block, right? That's significantly different. And you've got, again, all these skills down here, gain sneak, gain, you know, additional dice, gain additional dice, gain additional dice, gain additional dice, gain 1 use of potion per combat when enchanting, get an additional resource. So I don't know how I feel about that either. Upgrading and enchanting, you're drawing these cards, and again, this is sort of the mixed bag, I think, on this side of things when you're upgrading or enchanting, right? You just draw a card from one of the aforementioned decks. And if you don't like it, I mean, you can pay extra of these resources, which I don't think are very easy to get based on what they say and only getting them in certain locations. And you just have to be able to pay whichever one you want to do. You just kind of get whichever one it is. There's not really, you just get absorb stamina here and boom, there you go. That's the only one you're going to get. Well, hope it's the one you wanted, because next one over got the icy enchantment that turns everything to ice when he hits it with a sword. Oh, sorry that yours only absorbs stamina. You know what I'm saying though, right? And that would be the question with that. Status cards, again, you know, they're a little bit different. The solo mode, the cooperation. I mean, and this is where they were talking about, you know, some players having a little bit slower. They go through the quest cards and what it looks like. And again, once you learn some of the symbology, I mean, again, this is relatively straightforward. I was actually impressed, like I said, with the nuance that's in this and the illustrations. And I just wish a few of these illustrations were up with the actual explanations, because otherwise, if you're a visual person like I am, sometimes connecting the visual with the text could be a little bit harder. But otherwise, this is really well done. And, you know, if the quest you succeed, then they've got it here. If you fail here, you have options here. I mean, so again, this is not the issue. It's just everything as a sum, does it equal or greater than the individual parts? Because the individual parts are relatively solid. You have your followers, your status cards, I mean, all this stuff that we've sort of talked about. Here are all your, and I like this, the glossary of icons. More games could use this. Anyway, let's go back to the page. Here is the nitty gritty. This is the, what are things at? How much are they? What are you getting for your value? Now, if you were one of those people that was like me at the very beginning, that was really put off because they didn't even include the stretch goals in the base game. They have completely revamped things. One of the updates from about like a week and a half ago or so addresses that. So again, blessing or curse, they did not clearly read the room well enough in terms of crowdfunding and what people thought of it when they initially launched things. That being said, they have also adapted things. And again, that goes with blessing curse. If you're too adaptable, is some of this stuff going to be left unfinished or left unfinished enough that it's not going to be as balanced? Or if you are more flexible and you're responding to people's legitimate critiques, not every backer's moan and groan, because that's the other thing I don't want to see on a campaign is, oh, somebody's creaking about this, we better do it. Somebody's creaking about this, I don't want to do that. So $92 for the base game with this now additional legendary exclusive deck that makes things harder and gives a little bit more of everything, honestly is probably a really good deal. That's probably the one that if you were to get something, if you were to say, Chris, you're looking at this game and you're thinking about getting this game, because unfortunately, I actually am. I was all set to make this video and say, guys, I am not getting this. I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. And then again, I read the rule book. And because this is so fleshed out and because there's so much detail in there, there's not a whole lot left to ambiguity. But it goes back to what I just said is, because all of these individual parts are very solid, is it going to reflect as a whole when it all comes together? Is it going to all come together? And the problem is you have these glimpses of people playing for an hour or two on a chapter 1, campaign 1 version, or whatever one it is. Is it going to work throughout? Is the leveling going to stay progressive with the enemies? I mean, I think of City of Kings, for example, where you kind of leveled up like this, and the enemy progression of difficulty went like this. And it was a huge turnoff. Sold that game after 3 plays of exactly the same thing because you had to min-max. Otherwise, game over. And if you min-maxed wrong or you mitigated wrong, game over. Start over again. That's what I worry about with this, is if you make, say what you will about the Pathfinder that's going up head-to-head against this, is Pathfinder's allowing you to adapt. Oh, I got the wrong skill this round. I got the wrong skill this turn. I can revamp things next turn and do something completely different. If you mess up getting skills that are less than optimal in Chapter 1 or Campaign 1, and you get to Campaign 2 or, God forbid, Campaign 3, and it's just not utilizable anymore, can you do anything about it? Or are you kind of SOL? Yeah, it's cooperative, so there's going to be some sharing and mitigating there. But, I mean, again, power creep, power discrepancy between players. Is there going to be a significant difference? That would be the main thing I'd worry about. Now, again, I like the fact that they went with a gameplay unlock tier. I give a lot of kudos to a lot of campaigns that do this. And so I also throw a lot of flack on campaigns that don't. And so I'm going to give them kudos for this. Say what you want about some of their other previous games. I mean, this is solid. I mean, these Dawnguard expansions and From the Ashes expansions are adding those mini modules of those mini campaigns that they've talked about in the updates. I mean, if we go over to update 34 here, for example, mini campaigns update, right? So you've got bandits, and they even tell you, okay, sort of like KDM, right? This monster in KDM replaces this one. This one goes in this section to replace it in the core game. And they do sort of the same thing here. Here you go. In the first campaign of the core game, to make it more difficult and rewarding, the Draugr mini campaign. This one goes in, where does it say this? Extra layer of difficulty in the first campaign. There we go. Skeleton Army in the second campaign of the game or in the Dawnguard expansion. Again, shuffling new event cards into the deck. The Dark Brotherhood, which again is very Skyrim. 10 elite assassins that are going to pop out, adding it to the second campaign or the Dawnguard expansion. So, I mean, you can see where they're going. So it's not just like, you throw it in. Here's Honeybuzz with the modules, and, or Everdell. Throw in as many expansions as you want and see and mix and match and kind of see what happens. Well, no, I mean, they're giving you explicit instructions, which is kind of, again, a little bit nice. So then it leaves you with the deluxe tier, which neoprene game mat, double-sided neoprene game mat, gold coins, metal coins. You guys know how I feel about metal coins. Miniature upgrades. Is all of that worth essentially over $100 for you? Because especially with the 2 expansions, you're talking a lifestyle game, because this is $300 US before shipping, and I don't even want to know what shipping is. I mean, shipping doesn't really matter nowadays. If you're taking into account shipping, you're either somewhere outside the US that does not get stuff fully, or anywhere in terms of localization stores, and then I really feel for you guys. But most of the Europe, Canadian, North America side of things, shipping is, you're either okay with the game and you're willing to pay the game plus whatever the shipping cost is now, even with the shipping conundrum that's going on, or you're just not that interested in the game enough. Whatever, it's, 20 pounds more. Okay, great. So go back to the rewards here. Again, deluxe tier, that's a lot. Base game, gameplay tier. Again, if you are on the fence at all, and if you want to get the exclusives, this is the one you go with. This is the one right here. It's up to at least 6 heroes. You've got at least, I think, 3 campaigns now with 3 chapters each. And they say 90 to 100 minutes, but I mean, if you're like Skyrim, it's going to be more than that. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, because you're going to have a lot of side quests and a personal quest, and it's going to be mainly the world quests of the campaign that you're going to be trying to finish more than anything else. And this is the other big thing. This is the Gamefound only exclusive, the legendary expansion that they've thrown in on every level as well. Free roam modes for campaignless experience. Again, great. It is what it is. And here's the 5 to 8 player expansion. I was, saying and talking about that earlier. And then you have the Dawn Guard. Again, 4 new characters, 1 new campaign, new factions, semi-competitive. Not a big fan of that. Vampire mechanisms, a big fan of that. But is it really worth 40 more pounds? 10-part dragon encounter. Again, 10-part Ghosts of Blades encounter. And 4 mini campaigns that we talked about there in a while back. And so this is the one, I'd say, of the 2, the From the Ashes expansion looks much better to me than the Dawn Guard one, because I also am a firm believer in non-semi-cooperative games in this sense, because semi-co-op just never works. It just does not work, except for very, very few exceptions. It is more the exception rather than the rule in most semi-co-op games, in my experience of, am I having fun, and is this going to be fun in general? So again, pass on the miniatures. Pass on the Call to Arms bundle. I think it's still, again, sort of strange that they're offering a whole bunch of Call to Arms in this campaign in the first place. That's a whole side tangent. So that's it in a nutshell. I mean, you've got plenty of other video and gameplay stuff. They're busting out all these Twitch people that are going to be playing it now in the next week, in the last week of the campaign. And I guess that's just stuff that you need to be aware of. There's alternate sculpts that they've unlocked, and you sort of work your way up here. Again, adding more cards to this. So, I mean, you see you're doing this, the mini campaign from the Ashes box, and they're just adding a little bit more to each of these boxes. I mean, again, the only thing that I worry about is you are pledge locking some of this stuff, and none of it says, I mean, this is the Legendary Encounter in the Legendary Encounter deck, but some of this stuff is, again, the Dawn Guard's Heroes Adventures Primer. It's kind of weird that you have Call to Arms stuff and Adventures Primer in with the game itself. Like, it's just kind of icky to me that it's got I don't want to say cross contamination, but it is what it is. It's got cross coverage in terms of games. Like, this game is supposed to be about the tabletop game, not the other skirmish game, not the adventure primer, nothing else like that. Then you've got this 6 additional vampires in the miniature pack. Again, legendary encounters, and another chapter here, which is in the From the Ashes. So you're getting content that is locked in those expansions, say what you will. And more campaigns have gone to that. Simon's gone to it first. Awakened Realms has gone to it, where you've got these stretch goals that are, not just with the core game. They're not just for everyone getting the regular pledge. They're for the people that are going to pay extra. And the question is, and again, I don't see, on this as being exclusive, but it makes you wonder, what is the expansion From the Ashes or Dawn Guard going to look like at retail if you're throwing in stretch goals that are going to be included in it as well? By the way, I do not like this dragon picture, this dragon sculpt. I really hope they get another dragon sculpt. The first couple times I saw that, I was like, what is that? I mean, I know what they're going for, having played Skyrim, but it just looks weird with the neck kind of doing that weird thing. So anyway, it's cool. It's a dragon. It says massive. I have no idea what that means in terms of scale. But anyway, so they've got a couple of extra stretch goals going there here. And that's it. That's what I think. So like I said, in summary, they've got some really interesting things going on. I think they have a huge scope, and I think it looks to be very similar to me to something like The Witcher. Obviously, it goes head-to-head IP-wise, and The Witcher obviously raised a ton more money, but The Witcher was also competitive. This is cooperative, and so I think you're attracting a different crowd, and I think it has a little bit of Pandemic-esque with those different quests and the campaigns, and although they have the free roam mode, my one worry in that is that it's not going to be fully fleshed out. Like, one is clearly going to be more superior to the others. And again, like I said, the solo variant is not really a fully fleshed out solo variant. It's, you just kind of do this with the other one and you can kind of play along and do it that way, which if you're a solo player, I would not recommend this game based on what I saw on the solo side of things, unless you're like super Skyrim, which is kind of weird because Skyrim in its nature is a solo game in the first place. So I would have thought that this would have gotten the full solo, like Turksy experience. David Turksy, shout out to you for doing an amazing job on what you do, even though I don't really solo. So I would be lying to you right now if I told you exactly what I was going to do with this before the end of the campaign. Because like I said, I think the core is actually probably a relatively good value. If you compare it to something especially like Destiny's, right? Destiny's, while it was half the price, it was probably also easily less than a third of the content that you're getting in the core with this, with the 3 campaigns and the legendary decks. And so if you did the core and you did the From the Ashes expansion, I need to stop talking now because I'm almost talking myself into it. That's what I would be potentially looking at, because I don't have any interest in the Dawn Guard. I mean, the vampirism's cool, but Skyrim, I want dragons, right? And so I'm going to get the expansion with the freaking dragon. That needs to be like a Liegeism on a shirt from my web store whenever I make, gear and stuff. But that's where I would head. That's what I would say is by far the most value. I don't think you need everything else. In fact, I would almost advise not to get everything else. I don't see any reason, unless you're doing the Call to Arms stuff or you're doing that Adventure Primer stuff, I would err on not getting anything else. I don't think it's necessary. You haven't seen anything else exclusive on there. But this is a scope. This is a well-developed scope. This is better developed at this point, I would argue, in 3/4 of the way through the campaign, with a rule book, with the explanations, with the amount of gameplay seen, than The Witcher was when I had a copy of that and they were 3/4 of the way through the campaign. Because there was only one mode of a rulebook that we were given for The Witcher. We were given competitive. We weren't given cooperative. We weren't given solo. We didn't have any of the expansion stuff with the extra boards and all of the other expansions that came afterwards. I didn't have any of that. I can look at it sitting over there on my couch and tell you that none of that is included. And so development-wise, this is actually very impressive. This is, on paper, I can't talk about what the finished product will look like, but on paper, this is what should be coming to crowdfunding on a more routine basis. Something this complete. We should not be coming with, we got some sketches of stuff still, and we're actively drawing some of the miniatures and the models, and no. Rulebook should be almost set and complete. Gameplay should be almost set and complete. There should be no variation or waning with that unless someone notices a significant difference or issue. And so I give them, again, a lot of kudos, and I was not expecting to be having this tone with this video when I sat down post-holiday to read through, look through, and analyze this, because like a lot of you, I was really kind of potentially turned off to this by the very way it sort of came out the gates with how it projected, how it was speaking, and how it was announced. So it sounds weird to say, and I wasn't expecting it to come out of my mouth, but I'm intrigued. I would love to sit down with a copy of this and play it and, dig into it deep to see how it compares to some of the other stuff out there. And the obvious, like I said, head-to-head competitor is going to be The Witcher, with just all of the comparisons, especially just from the video game console side of things. So that's where it's ultimately going to come, considering, ironically, both of these games people thought were going to be the opposite. They thought Skyrim was going to be the competitive and The Witcher was going to be the cooperative. And The Witcher's kind of doing a little everything, and this is just pure cooperative, which, again, I would probably argue that I think the best player count looks like 2, probably maybe 3. But again, that's my own personal opinion. So what am I going to do? I have no freaking clue. I wasn't planning on backing this, liking this, or even talking about it in this manner. So I'm going to be watching at the end here, and I could easily see myself picking up a core. Now, is the exclusive going to be worth it? I don't know. Modiphius' track record with other games on Board Game Geek is not necessarily nearly as good. Thunderbirds, Siege of the Citadel, I've heard horror stories from people on. Of, incomplete, late, just lots of issues with production and quality and that side of things. And then we kind of get outside of most of anything else you'd probably recognize. So that's the other big concern. Now you get Fallout and some of that stuff too, but I mean, that's about it. So is this along the lines of other companies that have kind of disappointed? Or is this more along the lines of Steamforged Games, which kind of did this, but now has been really kind of doing this lately with some of their other ones? I don't know. But this is going to be the test, and I think there's probably some pressure on them to really put out something quality-wise from this name, because I would assume the makers of Skyrim and Bethesda are going to be pretty scrutinizing when it comes to that, or at least I would be if my baby was being put out in a different realm of things, and I want my baby to be represented the best way it can be at any size, game, type of product in general. So I don't know. There you go. Everything you need to know. My thoughts on Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, the board game. Gamefound, finishing soon. Link in the description below. If you liked it, let me know what you think. What are you doing with it? I mean, it's a lot. I definitely would argue not to go all in, but to each their own. Again, thanks for watching. Stay classy. I'll see you around.